Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I know for some of you it's in the morning, for some of you it's at night, and I know for my Australian watchers, viewers, it's probably 3 a.m. So, Villainous, if you're out there, thanks for always being such a loyal viewer. And wow, he is. So there you go. Welcome, Villainous. Good to see you. And yeah, a new name, the Margori Radman. Greetings and blessings, he says. So, yeah, today I want to continue with the talk on what may well be, and what has been titled by observers, by scholars, as the Islamization of Christianity, otherwise known as the Protestant Reformation. So we want to go through this evidence. I want to finish these slides. I've got about 18 or so slides to go through, roughly. And let's see if the thesis that I've presented so far holds up. I have tested this extensively against the evidence. I have done some detailed analysis. There is a great deal of evidence. Obviously, I can only give you a summary, but it seems that I'm not simply just making this up. There is legitimate reason to suspect that Islam had an active role in incubating, in developing, in assisting the Reformation, and that much Reformation theology, much Reformation thinking, ecclesial structure, and so on, is based upon Islam. It seems that there's the likelihood that this is based upon the works of scholars like Ibn Taymiyyah. You're looking at Hanbali theology, and also potentially from Sufism. And this would be a precursor to, but very similar to what we would call today Wahhabism in Saudi Arabia. Now, Wahhabism starts around 1740. Now, the Reformation was a couple of centuries prior, but it looks like these are, shall we say, parallel movements. They share certain overlaps. Now, of course, this is not that the Reformation theology became 100% Islamic. It's the way communism changes from different cultures. You have the woke, which is, shall we say, communism with Western characteristics, with European or American characteristics. Look at Maoism, that's communism with Chinese characteristics. So it adapts to the culture that it's in. So there's contextual changes. And then, of course, because it's based certainly on personal preference of the person implementing it, you start to see that they've added some of their own personal flavor to it. And the same way you have all of these competing and contradictory versions of Protestantism within their own schisms. So welcome, Ave Maria Theotokos. Nice to see you. She says, God bless you, Brother Lloyd. Thank you, and God bless you all. We have H.M. Fogg. We have Muhammad Afridi, and he still cannot spell. Poor boy, poor boy. I have no idea why he tries. I mean, it's like, when do you think this guy is actually going to permit us to take him seriously? At what point is this guy going to come in good faith? And obviously he's triggered. Obviously he's been butthurt by things we've shown here. And yeah, look, he's obviously trying very hard to get a reaction. That's clearly his point. And yeah, I mean, he's saying that the Christian religion is racist. Weird religion. I mean, Christian religion is racist, weird religion. Muhammad was a pedophile. Jesus was not a racist. But Philip says they will call you a blasphemer, they will call you a heretic, a disbeliever, an infidel, but they will never call you wrong. That's an interesting point. Thank you. And the show must go on, and the show will go on. So, Christina, very welcome. And Indian Christian apologetics. Yeah, you guys rock. I think you gave India a little run for their money there a couple of weeks ago. Afridi is a Pakistani name. Yeah. What can we say? Okay, so let's dive into this. I just want to catch up on one slide because I realized as I was making these slides, I forgot. I accidentally deleted an entry from one of the slides. So I will have to do this off my memory, so I may make an error. That's always the concern, which is why I have slides. We spoke about England. England was playing both sides between the Ottomans and then eventually with the Persians as well, or the Iranians. And we spoke about this guy called Robert Shirley. And Robert Shirley, he was very much involved in actually training the the Muslims to fight, in modernizing their army, in improving their ability to fight. Now, what would Muslims do with this improved ability to fight? Of course, they'd fight against the West. So this is a matter of where money overrides principles, money overrides Christian unity, money overrides loyalty to your race, loyalty to your in-group. And we see this now with this Englishman who has the backing of the Queen. And one of the things I'm going to present here is that the Protestant movement, like Judas, sold out Christianity for money. It sold out Christianity for titles. It sold out Christianity for land and power. It was a movement that was treason against Europe. The Protestants actively participated with the Ottomans, for instance, against Europe. They actively fought against Catholic Europe. They actively participated in the Ottoman war machine. Now, people are going to say, well, sometimes there was coercion, and certainly that was the case. But then ask yourself a simple question. Where were the Protestants at the Battle of Vienna? I mean, you had like a lot of Catholics and like 3 or 4 Protestants who probably got lost while on their way to McDonald's. And they just kind of accidentally ended up on the battlefield against the Ottomans. Where were they at the Battle of Lepanto? Where was that vaunted English navy at the Battle of Lepanto? They were at home, sipping cocoa, reading Martin Luther's writings that said, you know, the Pope is an antichrist, the Pope is evil, Catholics are evil, Catholics need to be wiped out. And, the Turk is the rod against the Catholics for being so evil. And never mind what the book of John says about what equals antichrist, because by that definition, the Catholics are by no means antichrist, but the Muslims are. But Martin Luther's hypocrisy and lies never got in the way of his, of his writing. And so they were busy reading about Martin Luther telling them to view this as a just punishment, and we really need to collaborate, just like I think the Vichy French, they called it during World War II. We need to collaborate with the Nazis against, the French. By the same token, the Protestants collaborated with the enemy against Europe. And this is something I plan to follow up. And we're going to start looking at the distinct Islamic flavor, the distinct Islamic parallels, the distinct Islamic borrowings in the theology of people like Luther, like Calvin, and many others. We've already discussed the Unitarians. We should call them Islamic monotheists that were borrowing, shall we say, very distinct Islamic ideas, putting them into their version of Christianity, and they were regarded by Protestants as devout Christians, even though they denied the divinity of Jesus, for instance, and the Trinity. So, I think I've made my point. Cui bono, that's the title of one of my slides, Silver. That is exactly the title of one of my slides. So, good evening, everyone. Good to see you all. Archambault, good evening. Yep. So, again, I think that I tend to make rather bold statements, but hopefully I can provide evidence, the receipts that back up what I'm trying to say. So, of course, the English were happy to sell out Europe to train these Muslims, to modernize their army, to make them a more potent fighting force, because they would benefit. Once they took out the Catholics, the Protestants could then rule alongside their friends. It's like the story of the frog and the crocodile. The frog goes across, or was it the scorpion and the frog? What's that story, right? It goes across the river, but of course the crocodile's going to eat the frog, or the scorpion's going to sting the crocodile. Or the frog, because that what's going to happen is eventually, once the Muslims have taken out the Catholics, they're going to take out the Protestants. Their theology, their toleration was merely just a temporary restraint, so that they could use that strategically to gain an advantage, and then they'll also just come for the next ones. But the collaboration between the Protestant powers and the Muslims goes back 5 centuries. Okay, let me skip forward. I did discuss and I did show you how the Protestants opened the doors of Europe, and the story of the Jews opening the doors of Toledo, that's an apocryphal tale that has no basis in history. But we do know explicitly that the Battle of Vienna, which was essentially the the defining battle that eventually ultimately led to the defeat of the Ottomans, their push into Europe, which if they'd taken Vienna, they would have then defeated Europe. The Protestants fought on the side of aided and abetted and assisted and were rewarded for it, right, by the Muslims. And so this is the legacy of Protestantism. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And of course, we saw all of the indications, the letters, the documents, the claims that I would rather be Turkish than papist. I'd rather be Muslim than Catholic. And how they were more similar in their theology, because, you can't have those you can't have Catholic idolatry, so therefore we need to just go with the Muslims. Whatever. So we can ask ourselves, was there a genuine theological overlap? And the answer is yes. Christine says, Pope St. Pius V begged Europe to join together to fight in the Battle of Lepanto, but European nations, except for Catholic Spain, threw the few. Yeah, exactly. Where were the Swedes? Where were the Germans? Where were the English? Where were the Dutch? Well, they were busy fighting the Catholics, distracting the Catholics, weakening the Catholics, dividing the Catholic forces. And this looks like a genuine coordinated campaign. The Catholics would be distracted by the Protestants, and then the Ottomans would make their move. Then the Catholics have to go deal with the Ottomans, and the Protestants make their move. And there was this whole, this is what happened. Protestants betrayed Europe. This is the only conclusion I can come to. So, yes, there was truth to that as well. Definitely lots of looting went on. Muhammad needs help with more than just his spelling, but yeah, they are illiterate. That is true. Mike Smile says, thanks, Lloyd. I now know why Northern Europe is rich and the South is poor. One fought wars against the Muslims and the other took bribes. And that is true. They took bribes. Judas. They sold out Christ's kingdom, Christendom, for money. That's exactly what they did. Okay, so let me see if I've missed anything. Suicidal empathy, Villainous says, is not new. Poor Muslims need help so they can get back to the long game of taking Europe. Yes. And what shocks me is that, I'm not even Catholic, but when I look at the Catholics bravely, loyally, consistently fought for the defense of Europe, whereas the Protestants actively aided and abetted the enemy and sold out Europe. How do Protestants explain this? Honestly, how do Protestants explain this treasonous, traitorous behavior? How? So Bernadette says, thank you, Brother Lloyd. I always pray for the gifts of wisdom, discernment, and right judgment, divine knowledge. And this leads me to Catholic brother and sisters channels. Well, thank you. So okay, let's dive into this. So we've covered this. The people who initiated the Battle of Vienna was the Protestants, Lutherans. And the Ottomans took advantage of this opportunity to crush the Catholics, to crush the Habsburgs, to crush European defense. And they were just going to roll into Europe and they were going to Islamize Europe. And the Protestants were like, hell yes, sign us up. We can finally crush those evil Catholics, and us and our brother Muslims, we can all just rule in peace, happily ever after, hugging trees, skipping through the valleys, and all of that stuff. Silver says you make bold statements, but that is why we all subscribed. But have I proven my case? That's the thing. Have I provided strong evidence to make my case? Aside from a few nutty true believers, is it really suicidal empathy, though? Seems like plain old greed. I wouldn't say it's only greed, because remember I spoke when I was doing the talk on Calvin and Calvin's alignment with Islam, with Islam Adakdok. I asked the question more than once, if the theology of these reformers, of these groups, these reformed theology, if it aligns more closely with Islam than with Christians, where do their loyalties lie? I asked that. Where do their loyalties lie? And we see in history their loyalties lay with the Muslims because they have shared theology. That is a problem. They are stabbing you in the back because they reject your theology, because they're more aligned with the Muslims. So a house divided will not stand. And these people have too much in common. Their DNA is shared with Islam. This is a serious problem. Philip says, I agree, the Reformation came at the worst moment. Muslims were coming from the southeastern flank. I don't think it's accidental. Sorry, Joseph. I don't think the Reformation was an accident. Okay, let me show you something here. This is a paper that I'm going to drop this link in the chat, and I'll just put the title as well if you give me a second. I'm just going to grab this portion of it. I'm going to drop this in the chat so you can have the link. This is the Protestant Reformation as an Islamization of Christianity. Now, this is not the first person or the first two people to have this thought, right? These are not the first people to come up with this idea. So they speak here of Protestantism arose due to the influence of Islam in Europe in the Middle Ages. And this is exactly the conclusion I came to. I found this document that was passed to me by one of my subscribers after I already started my thesis. And I started this thesis a year ago, right? Now, sometimes you find the right information if you have the right questions. I didn't have the right questions. I just had this idea. I just had this feeling it has to be like this. And I started scratching around, but it's only once I started to refine my thesis, and which was a couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. So, because I had this a year ago, I worked in it, I don't know, for 6 months, but I wasn't looking in the right places. I wasn't asking the right questions, getting the right data. Then I dropped it for 6 months, and now I'm back to it. And the last 2 weeks has been a snowball, an avalanche of data. This is not an off-the-wall proposal. This is something that is long acknowledged, and it is gaining momentum in academia. So this is why Northern Europe welcomes Muslims with open arms. It seems that, yes, you're right, Protestantism is linked to Islam. And yes, I would say yes. I mean, I think I've said this. Everyone was on payroll. Very well stated. Thank you. Yes, the Protestants were on payroll. They were very much on payroll. They were also ideologically aligned. They were theologically aligned. Yes, the Battle of Lepanto did save a disloyal and ungrateful Europe from Muslim takeover. And the Protestants constantly were aiding and abetting the enemy. And welcome, Catherine. So welcome, everyone. Yeah, the Protestants were living in la-la land if they think Muslims are on their side. If they don't want to side with the Catholics, then don't side with Muslims. Yeah, but okay, yeah. So this is an interesting paper. This is worth reading. I'm going to look at a different paper now. This is one I mentioned. I'll go through a few pieces on this. I'm going to drop this link in the chat as well, so you guys can have a look at this one. And I'm going to drop the title in the chat as well, so you guys have it. Influence of Islam on the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century. Oops. Okay, so let's have a look here. This is from Zulfikar Ali Shah, and he says, the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century was a transformative period that saw the emergence of Martin Luther, Zwingli, and others, Calvin, who wanted to reform Christianity's practices and beliefs. I believe Barack Obama wanted to bring change, reform America. Well, he made it very successfully. He did. Look at the mess you've got today. And he spoke of the substantial influence, because what is often underemphasized is the substantial influence of Islamic theology and practices on this movement, especially due to the close relations between Europe and the Muslim East during this period. And there were very close connections. There were political, theological, literature, diplomatic, trade. There were heavy connections. Conversion to Islam in Transylvania. And he says, this was not just a sporadic occurrence, but rather a consistent trend, because that was under the domination of the Ottomans, the Muslims. They immersed themselves in Islamic theological teachings. He says the reformers, including Martin Luther, were well aware of Islam. And he says the engagement with Islamic theological heritage led to a blending of ideas, some of which got integrated into Protestant beliefs. And that is a statement that I believe we can prove, or we can certainly show overwhelming evidence. And I will do so. The Protestant Reformation's Islamic resemblance. It's intriguing to note that many of the Reformed churches and their theological positions in the 16th century bore a closer resemblance to Islam than they did to Catholic Christianity. That is fact. When you look at the theological alignments, their practices, they deviate from established historical records of the early church, things like the Didache, the church fathers, all of the ancient writings we have, and they slew straight towards Wahhabism. Now, again, don't tell me, oh, Wahhabism came later. I know. However, you will see that Wahhabism is pretty much what the Protestant movement was aping. So Then you've got his stances against hierarchy, traditional practices, use of images in worship, and emphasis on scripture over tradition made his version of Christianity appear closer to Islamic beliefs than to existing Catholic practices. Fact. Right. So it says that the Pope's representatives branded his teachings as resembling the Turkish faith more than the papal faith. And that's why things were called like Anabaptist Turkism, Anabapto-Turkism, or Calvino-Turkism, because they were seeing Islamic influences on these groups that called themselves Christian. And then we know Michael Servetus was quoting the Quran and saying, well, see, the Quran says, therefore the Bible is wrong. The Quran says, therefore no Trinity. The Quran says, therefore Jesus is not God. Okay, thanks, Michael. That's great. And he's a reformer. He's regarded as a devout Christian. Even in Transylvania, again, once you go back to that part of the world, Eastern Europe, Central Europe, they were regarding the Unitarians, these new Muslim/Christians, as devout Christians, a valid Christian sect. Totally contradictory, but still valid. I don't know how. 1 + 1 is equal to 5, 1 + 1 is equal to 2. But that's an equally valid, just as good answer as 2. I don't know how that works, but okay. Prayers were held in mosques across the Ottoman Empire, wishing for Martin Luther's success. What? Prayers were held in mosques across the Ottoman Empire, wishing for Why are Muslims paying for praying for or paying to paying? They did pay. They were paying and they were praying for Martin Luther to succeed. Okay. Militarily, the Ottomans leveraged their power to protect the Protestants. Basic historical fact. This protection wasn't just altruistic, but also strategic, with Ottoman interest intertwined with Protestant success in Europe. It's called useful idiots. Protestants were greedy, but also useful idiots. The Ottomans put pressure on the Habsburg monarchy to ease off the Protestants. Recorded historical fact. Military collaboration. Historian Stephen A. Fisher-Galati noted how the Ottomans' actions in regions like Hungary and their alliances, their pacts, their treaties, such as with the French Emperor Francis I, impacted the trajectory, I always have a problem with that word, of the Protestant Reformation. These factors compelled leaders like Charles to offer concessions and guarantees to the Lutherans. Right, squeeze them, right? That's what they did, play them. It is primarily viewed as a Christian movement, but the undercurrents of Islamic influence played a crucial role in shaping the direction and outcomes of the Reformation. There were shared ideas and principles between Protestantism and Islam. Last few points, and I go to my slides. That may be the case, but that was also I think the easiest land bridge, because they couldn't go up through the center because they were too strong, but on the eastern flank they were weak. And of course you can thank the Hussites for that, for starting to cause instability and for finding that they liked these Islamic ideas and they needed to break from the Catholic Church, and of course they needed to find an alternative. But these are things I want to explore going forward as I start developing new slides on this idea. Yeah, so where was I? A Christian that denies the deity of Christ is not a Christian, but then we need to tell the Protestants that, you see. Somehow these Protestants couldn't figure that out. I have no idea why. Just remember that fatalism was common during the Middle Ages, which is not Christian, but a pagan or Muslim belief. How long ago did Islamic influence start? I would say you're looking at Jan Hus. And we're looking prior to that. Again, don't ask me to prove this, but from what I've seen of the evidence, having looked at this, you go back to the 11th century, you end up in Italy. You're going to end up with the Medici family. You're going to end up with the Renaissance. You're going to end up with the translation of a lot of, shall we say, classical, philosophical, and theological literature. But that literature gets pumped out of the Byzantine Empire. Think Eastern Orthodox. So, and then think about what happened in Central and Eastern Europe under the Ottomans. Think of the same thing happening in the Byzantine Empire under the Eastern Orthodox. Because at some point, now sorry, my nose is itching. At some point in the past, I've said this often over the last 2 years, that I have deep reservations about Eastern Orthodoxy, because I believe the Eastern Orthodox Church was infiltrated long before. The same way that I'm now showing that the Protestant churches were infiltrated by Islam and indoctrinated or altered by Islam, affected by Islam. By the same token, the same thing happened with Eastern Orthodoxy. Give me one sec. My nose is itching like crazy. Yes, Christina. this is exactly where this is going. So, and this is exactly the point. Correct, Rory, I agree. Jesus is the Lord, which also Protestants believe. If the Muslims took over Europe, these Protestants would be dimmy and treated harshly. And yeah, it's I don't know how they didn't get that. The idea that Mary is a goddess, where did that come from? I don't know. You tell me, man. Let me see. Lloyd has definitively shown America was 100% established as a first Christian nation. Yes, I think that much is clear. Any Christian that denies Christ's church, his bride is not a true Christian. Well, he would be antichrist, right? According to the gospel. Okay, so let me finish this. The role of the Ottomans. Luther's Reformation could have met a similar fate if not for the Ottoman Turks. Kenneth Seton, and this is not the only historian that will say this, a historian argued that the Turks were pivotal for the success of the Protestant Reformation, suggesting that without their presence, Protestants might have been annihilated like the Albigensians. Odd that he brings up the Albigensians, another heretical group. Fisher Galati, another historian, even declared the Ottomans as the savior of Protestantism. I've shown other historians that said exactly the same thing. Okay, and then he speaks of shared iconoclasm. It's just one overlap, just one parallel. Shared iconoclasm. Look at what Ayatollah John Calvin did in Geneva, the destruction that happened in England. Oh wow, Sylvan Blasser, thank you. It says, you've donated solid reference after solid reference. Lloyd has talent in being able to do offensive blitzkrieg. Let's pray for this channel to growth. Well, thank you very, very much. I really do appreciate it. Really, it's a lot of time that I spend. It's like having a second job. And yeah, let's please do, if you do like the content, please like it, share it, do subscribe, ask your friends to subscribe. I do understand I put out very difficult, very contentious, very awkward material, things that many Protestants don't want to see. I understand I say things that are going to cause upset, but there's not much I can do about that. No matter how nicely I've said these things, they cause anger. But I believe these things are true. I believe the references speak for themselves. So yes, thank you. And thank you again for the support. Yes, Ayatollah John Calvin. I just put out a video called Ayatollah John Calvin of Geneva, because he was an Ayatollah. When you look at the man's behavior, you're like, are these the Ayatollahs of Tehran, or was this Geneva, Europe? Yeah, let's just say I think he's appropriately called the Ayatollah John Calvin. Legit. Yes, I agreed. Very well said. Catherine, yes, exactly. But that's a vain hope. That's a vain hope. That would be a totally vain hope. Okay, well, so fine. Let's skip this. This is a great article I want to recommend. I'll show you this later. It doesn't mean I recommend the theology or whatever, but it's just there's a great article that does a great job summarizing a lot of the issues I learned from this when I first read it. I would recommend it's on Answers in Genesis, Refuting Unitarian Errors Regarding. Well considered. It's really well thought through. ORA-Text, thank you very much. And he says, I visited the cathedral in Geneva that was taken over by Calvin. I felt really sad seeing the stripped walls and the telltales of decoration and icons. Yeah, someone else wrote to me. They also visited, and they said it seemed bare, like a box. So yeah, D. Mielman, very welcome. Yeah, no, that. So, but thank you again also, ORA-Text. Thank you very much for the donations. Zeal says, he that is not with me is against me, and he that gathereth not with me is scattereth abroad. Yep, so yeah, the degenerate, the tyrant, and the fool. I will not disagree with you at all, Century Sense. Welcome. Okay, so then we've looked through these. And I want to show you this paper, last one, The Islamic Origins of the Common Law. Where does English common law come from, which is across the world? They were looking for a cohesive, in-place legal system. And what happened was the Muslims had established their own legal system all over the world, and successfully so. Also despotically and tyrannically so. And the English were saying, hey, we need a legal system. Those Muslims have a really good one. Let's borrow that. It's called the Sharia. It looks fantastic. Since we're already cooperating in all these ways, and we will cooperate in the future, and we will sell Europe out for money because we'll become a massive trading power. Let's borrow the legal system too. Now, this thesis is about 30 years old. It was obviously controversial when it was first published. Now it's becoming effectively mainstream. Now it's becoming the norm. It's accepted. The Islamic Origins of the Common Law by John A. Makdisi. Henry II created the common law in the 12th century, which resulted in revolutionary changes in the English legal system. And again, thanks to Mr. Mieleman for this. Chief among which were the actions of debt, the assize of novel disseisin, and trial by jury. The sources of these three institutions have long been ascribed to influences from other legal systems such as Roman law. Professor Makdisi has uncovered new evidence which suggests that these institutions may trace their origins directly to Islamic legal institutions. The evidence lies in the unique identity of characteristics of these three institutions with those of the Islamic counterparts, the similarity of function and structure between Islamic and common law, and the historic opportunity for transplant from Islam through Sicily. Wow, wow, wow. So let me see. Yep, let's continue. So good afternoon. Hello, Gabriel. Welcome. Yes, the fact that there is a link between common law and the Sharia is mind-blowing. All of this is just, I mean, it just leaves me just like, yeah. Yes, agreed. I have been to the Hagia Sophia. I've visited Istanbul. I've been there. I've done a tour of the Hagia Sophia. It's very sad. So, okay, right. So guys, I'll leave this. I will drop this link. Tell you what, this link, let me drop this in the chat to this particular paper. I will call this John Makdisi, The Islamic Origins of Common Law. I will drop this link as well now in the chat. And you can download the paper and have a look. I'll drop it 3 times in a row so you can just have it there, easily find it. Okay, so while he was hiding tyranny, the man was tyrannical. You got to read what the guy was doing. It's insane. It's insane. Beating kids for playing, because you should be spending time learning theological things. What do you mean you want to go play games and things? Oh, you are not dressing modestly. We're going to have to fine you, or maybe we'll expel you, or maybe we'll beat you, you know? You know? Thank you very much, Ignatius. Very good word. I'll be having a talk about this at my Catholic parish. Pray that I speak well. So yes, no, thank you. He says, pray that I speak well. Protestants will be there too. So yeah, make sure you have everything written down carefully and use references, and good luck. So just see if I missed anything that common law is to govern the common is separate from the aristocracy who governed with royal law. Yeah, so hold on, let me just double check if I missed anything. Okay, let's jump into our slides. So let's jump into the slides. So this is where I finished. I'll just finish these. Let me close this window that I don't need. Okay, we've already covered this, right? That the Battle of Vienna was initiated by the Lutherans. How are you going to explain this? How do Lutherans explain the collaboration? How do they explain that they were willing to literally let the Muslims conquer Europe for the benefit of becoming king? Honestly, it's disgusting. So I've spoken with Imre Tököli. I've already finished this slide, right? And of course, he was given reward. He was given land and titles and money for doing what he did. Let's look at some battles that were dividing Catholic forces between 1410 and 1699. So we're going to go about 107 years before the Protestant Reformation kicks off with Luther's 95 Theses, right? Protestant wars weakened Catholic response to Ottomans. Of course, it divided the Catholic forces, right? Hussite wars, 1419 to 1434. Anti-Catholic wars. You have the Bohemian proto-Protestants that fought Catholic Holy Roman Empire. What was the impact? They divided Catholic resources. Ottoman context, the Ottomans advanced in the Balkans because you're fighting on one side so that they can take advantage of the chaos. So like Thessalonica 1413, there was no Catholic counteroffensive because they were tied up with the Hussites who were busy with their Hussite jihad. Siege of Belgrade, 1456, Catholic defense. John Hunyadi, Hungarian Catholic, leads 70,000, mostly Catholic troops. You'll find in all these wars, 85, 95, 100% of these troops are Catholic. Very little, if any, Protestant assistance. Otherwise, sometimes the Catholics would hire certain other groups and then pay them as mercenaries. So you have 70,000 mostly Catholic troops against Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II. Protestant input, none, because it's pre-Reformation. But you've got division. The Catholic forces are isolated. There's no broader European support due to internal conflicts. Maybe those conflicts are coordinated. Schmalkaldic War, 1546 to 1547. Again, an anti-Catholic war. Protestant Schmalkaldic League fights the Catholic Emperor Charles V. Impacted, weakens the Catholic Habsburgs during the Ottoman incursions. Was that, were they on the payroll? Were they paid to stir up trouble, cause a diversion? The Ottoman context, well, the Ottomans managed to consolidate Hungary because the Catholics were distracted. Then you have another page, the French Wars of Religion, 1562 to 1598. Again, anti-Catholic wars. You've got the Huguenots, the French Protestants versus the Catholics, causing up to apparently as many as 3 million deaths. Impact, France allied with the Ottomans, 1536 to 1798, diverting Catholic focus. Here you've got a Catholic betrayal, right? But they obviously did this for greed. The Ottoman context, they raided Provence, Nice, and the French Catholics were unable to respond. So in this case, if they couldn't beat them, they would join them. The Battle of Lepanto, 1571. You have a Catholic defense. The Holy League of Spain, Venice. The Papal States, 200 ships, they defeat the Ottoman navy. What Protestant input was there? Minimal. England sent a few ships, less than 5% contribution. But they had a lot more ships, but somehow they had certain treaties with the Ottomans going on at the time. So they had certain Muslim loyalties. They didn't want to, cause too much offense. This, of course, led to division. The Protestants were absent. The Catholics bore the brunt. And of course, what happens when the Catholics bear the brunt? It weakens them. And what happens then? The enemies can take advantage of the weakness. The 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, anti-Catholic war. Protestant states like Sweden and Denmark, again, versus the Catholics. Maybe as many as 8 million deaths. I mean, I dispute the numbers, but fine. Impact, Catholic resources are drained. The Ottomans aided the Protestant princes financially. So the German Lutherans were taking a little bit of money. Ottoman context, Ottomans pushed into Poland, leading to the Battle of Hotten in 1621, and the Catholics were overstretched. They were happy to sacrifice Europe to Muslims to make money. Just shocking. Let's look at some Protestant self-interest. Battle of Vienna, 1683, was a Catholic defense. The Holy League, Poland and Austria, with 80,000 troops. You're roughly 85% Catholic or more, because also they hired mercenaries, which obviously cost money, right? They were Catholic, they defeated the Ottomans. How much Protestant input? Maybe 12,000, okay? It could be as low as 6,000, but a very small percentage, very small percentage. You had some minor German states, Saxony. The Protestant powers were absent. Somehow didn't show up. They were busy that day. Again, leads to division. Protestants' prior wars, the 30 Years' War, had weakened Catholic unity. The Battle of Zenta, 1697. It goes on years later. Catholic defense, Habsburg-led army, Austria-Bavaria with 50,000 troops. Again, 90+% Catholic. They crushed the Ottomans. Where were the Protestants? Maybe they were, I don't know, helping the Muslims win and take Europe, because they'd for their 30 pieces of silver. I think that's what the Protestants were doing. What was the Protestant input? Negligible. The Dutch and the English were focused on the 9 Years' War versus Catholic France. Again, you had Protestant anti-Catholic conflicts going on at the same time, which split European focus, which took attention from the Catholic forces, which means that, the Ottomans could try their luck. So Protestants prioritized political power, political gain, and they were indifferent to Europe's fate in their schismatic aims, as their actions, which were alliances with Ottomans and absence from all these key anti-Ottoman battles, and their focus on anti-Catholic wars, shows there was a focus on self-interest over continental defense. They were looking to establish themselves and make little kingdoms over defending Europe. But also you had these fragmented Protestants, Lutherans, the Calvinists, the Anabaptists, the Unitarians. They also prioritized theological disputes or Catholic conflicts over a unified Ottoman resistance. They were more interested in hating the Catholics than stopping the Muslims. How much of that is still present today in 2025? Ignatius says, wow, this is so shameful, a complete stab in the back. Yes, they put the Catholic Church between a rock and a hard place. Exactly. Not just the church, Catholic governments. I mean, Catholic civilians. I mean, people had to be, fight. People had to go fight and die, right? Indian Christian says, this is really shameful and shocking to know. Yeah, tell me about it. Yeah. So Catherine M says, this is amazing. I'm assuming this was not covered in your history textbook at university or school, right? It certainly was not at mine. I can tell you that. I certainly did not learn this at school. Right, let's see. For the love of money is the root of all evil. Yep. Hating Catholics equals loving Christ. That was their view. Yeah, they were all about the hate. Yeah, either they were hating the Catholics or they were fighting one another. That is also true. Yeah, the Byzantines persecuted the Miaphysites, due to which Islam had a chance to spread. Look, yeah, again, I don't want to talk about the Byzantines. I haven't looked into that, but I have questions. Let's move on. Wikipedia. There's an interesting Wikipedia page. It's crazy. I came across this. I was like, huh? Protestantism and Islam. It's an actual real thing. Okay, genuine Wikipedia page. There it is. It's actually quite detailed. It's got lots of references. Fantastic stuff. Let's do the highlights. So let's do the highlights on that. So, and it tells us in this article, the rejection of images in worship is a common point in Protestantism and Islam. Sheer coincidence, I promise. This was already recognized extensively from the earliest times, as in correspondence between Elizabeth I of England and her Ottoman Empire counterparts, in which implied that Protestantism was closer to Islam than to Catholicism. Now, that's fascinating. We're more Muslim than you would realize, We're just like you Muslims. We love Jesus too. Yeah. This is also a point developed by Martin Luther on War Against the Turks, in which he praised the Ottomans for their rigorous iconoclasm. I've covered some of that. It is part of the Turks' holiness, the Muslims' holiness, that they tolerate no images or pictures and are even holier than our destroyers of images, like Calvin and so on. For our destroyers tolerate and are glad to have images on gulden, groschen, rings, and ornaments, but the Turk tolerates none. So the Turks are better Christians than these reformers, and they stamp nothing but letters on his coins. On War Against the Turk, 1529, Martin Luther. Fundamentalism. Islam and Protestantism have in common that they are both based on a direct analysis of scriptures. The Quran alone. I follow the Quran alone. I follow the Bible alone. I pray directly to Allah. Yeah. See, the Bible for Protestantism and the Quran for Islam. This can be contrasted to Catholicism, in which knowledge is analyzed, formalized, and distributed by the existing structure of the church, which has held onto and passed down the tradition, which prevents deviation into heresy and so on. Islam and Protestantism are thus both based on a rhetorical commitment to a universal mission, when Catholicism is based on an international structure. So, in other words, private opinion, a rhetorical commitment, what I say, my personal opinion, what the Lord has laid on my heart privately, private revelation, which the Bible does not recommend as valid, private revelation versus an international structure. This leads to possibilities of fundamentalism based on the popular reinterpretation of scriptures by radical elements. Didn't we have that? Villainous, I also have serious concerns about Wikipedia, but if Wikipedia shows today's date, is it wrong? And if Wikipedia has actual references that are correct, is it wrong? Now, certainly they'll tell you lies about Donald Trump, and they'll lie to you about BLM, and they'll lie to you about LGBT, but are they wrong about this? Considering that this lines up exactly with everything else that I've been saying. So the term fundamentalism was first used in America in the 1920s to describe the consciously anti-modernist wing of Protestantism. We also know as Salafism, the Wahhabis. You may have heard of them before. So, Wikipedia, Protestantism and Islam, Part 2. Islamic and Protestant fundamentalism also tend to be very normative of individuals' behaviors, because every individual is his own church and own pope. So religious fundamentalism in Protestantism and Islam is very concerned with norms surrounding gender, sexuality, and family. Isn't that just sheer coincidence? Although Protestant fundamentalism tends to focus on individual behavior, whereas Islamic fundamentalism tends to develop laws for the community, just like Ayatollah John Calvin. The most notable trend of Islamic fundamentalism, Salafism, is based upon a literal reading of the Quran and Sunnah, without relying on the interpretation of Muslim philosophers, rejecting the need for taqlid for recognized scholars. Fundamentalist Protestantism is similar in that the traditions of men and the church fathers are rejected in favor of a literalist interpretation of the Bible, which is seen as inerrant, just like the Quran. Islamic fundamentalists and Protestant fundamentalists often reject contextual interpretation. So, let me see if I've missed anything. Yeah, Jesus never mentioned scripture in his ministry, never, not even remotely. He said, I am leaving you the church. No mention of scripture. He says he's fulfilled the Old Testament, and he says, yeah, the church is the pillar and foundation of truth. It is on this rock I will build my church. He doesn't say I'm going to have you write some books. So that's a fairly good point. Yes, history repeating itself. They knew what worked before, and they're just doing it again. Yes. Okay, so let me see. Let's just finish this page. Another similarity with Protestantism and Salafism is criticism of saint veneration and belief in the power of relics and tombs, and emphasis on praying to Allah alone. I don't need no priest. I don't need no church. I pray straight to Jesus. Okay, what authority do you have? Well, my opinion is completely error-free, totally inerrant, because the Holy Spirit talks to me, and that's why I disagree, and everyone else around me who does the same thing disagrees, because we all have our own conflicting and contradictory opinions, because sola scriptura. Islamic Protestantism, parallels have regularly been drawn in the similar attitudes of Islam and Protestantism towards the scriptures. Some trends in Muslim revival have thus been defined as Islamic Protestantism. So within the academic literature, this idea goes back 500 years. People are saying, but this is Islam in Christian disguise. In a sense, Islamization is a political movement to combat Westernization using the methods of Western culture, namely a form of Protestantism within Islam itself. We know it as Wahhabism. Islam created the Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Reformation gave inspiration to Wahhabism. Vitality. Islam and Protestantism share common vitality in the modern world. The two most dynamic religious movements are what can loosely be called popular Protestantism and resurgent Islam, although the approach to civil society is different. Then, next topic. So, Protestant Ottoman alliances. They influenced the Reformation and Southern Europe. The Muslim Ottomans systematically supported Protestant movements during the 16th century, influencing the Reformation and altering the balance of power in Southern Europe. There was direct support for Protestant princes. There was military support. They provided military support to Protestant princes like the Lutheran princes in Germany and other places. The Ottoman threat meant that the Catholic states focused their military resources on the East, which weakened their ability to suppress Protestant uprisings in the West. And then when they've dealt with as they're busy dealing with the Protestants, then the Muslims do their thing again. So it was just this whole game of whack-a-mole, which looks very coordinated. So, for example, during 1541, Siege of Buda, Muslims captured the city and established a foothold in Hungary, creating a power imbalance that Protestant leaders exploited. The Ottomans extended financial aid to key Protestant figures like Lutheran princes, letting them strengthen their military capabilities against the Catholics. For money. This financial backing was crucial in sustaining the Protestant League during the 30 Years' War, and then intelligence and diplomacy. Yes, the wiki article, I mean, yeah, it's legit because it matches all the other evidence I've brought up so far. I mean, notice I got this far without having to quote Wikipedia, right? So let me see. Sure, Jesus did quote scripture, but was he quoting the New Testament or was he quoting the Old Testament, which was fulfilled? And then the New Testament came a little bit later because it wasn't written yet. There was no Bible when Jesus was alive. There was no Gospels. There was no New Testament. So, yeah. Yeah. So which books of the Bible were complete and written and printed and being distributed when Jesus was alive? So, okay, let me see. Yeah. Yes, Protestants do follow. I've mentioned this, the ulama model of Islam. Now the pastors hold the same power like Muslim ulamas. Authority was broken. Yes, I mentioned that yesterday in my discussion on the ulama of the scholars, the council of scholars, if you will, the major scholars in Islam, and the ulama. It's the students, those who learn this, the knowledge, the people of knowledge, the students of knowledge. Okay, so let me finish here. So intelligence and diplomacy. The Ottomans utilized intelligence operations to understand the political landscape in Europe. They engaged in diplomatic relations with Protestant leaders to build alliance against Catholic foes, against common Catholic foes. What is the impact on the Protestant Reformation? Particularly, they were building intelligence against the Habsburgs. This was evident when the Ottomans supported the Protestant princes during the Schmalkaldic War. Pardon me. Next thing, diverting Catholic resources. The Ottoman threat compelled Charles V and his successor Ferdinand to allocate military resources to defend against Ottoman incursions rather than on suppressing the Protestant movements, which are themselves often very violent in their jihads. The dual threat allowed Protestant forces to consolidate power and gain a foothold in Saxony and Hesse. This strengthened Protestant identity. Ottoman support empowered Protestant leaders to frame their resistance as a righteous fight against Catholic oppression, because Islam would be so much better for Europe. This is why we need to destroy the Catholics, and we need to aid the Ottomans in taking over Europe. Sorry, we need to aid the Muslims in taking over Europe. Maybe we need to just open the borders and import lots of Muslims, then we can blame the Jews for that, when this is exactly what the Protestants were doing 500 years ago. Maybe they're doing it today. We can blame the Jews for opening the gates of Toledo to take over a Catholic city, which the Protestants were deliberately trying to destroy anyway. And then the Protestants can ignore the fact that they literally sold out Europe and tried to allow the Muslims to conquer Europe and actively abetted that process. But yeah, let's not let the truth get in the way of a good Jew-hating story, right? So by allying with Muslim powers like Turkey's 1683 pact with Kara Mustafa, the English and Dutch, who were trading, who were selling weapons, upgrading the Muslim army. I mean, upgrading the Muslim army, we need to do that, because how else are the Muslims going to defeat those bloody Catholics? You know, they traded with the Ottomans, so the Protestants gained military and economic leverage, solidifying identity as a distinct anti-Catholic force in Europe. They would see, because they were Protestant, they were anti-Catholic. And what you do when you're anti-Catholic, you try to militarily destroy the Catholics and you ally with the Muslims. That's how you are anti-Catholic. And then, of course, historical outcomes. Without Sergeant Grinch, we'll forgive you. But welcome, good to have you here. Okay, let me see. Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, well, that's, you see, the problem is, Rory, that if you're a Protestant, what authority do you have as an individual? Like, zero. This has to come from the top. How much unity is there amongst Protestants? Very little. How can you make anything binding? How can a Protestant church declare anything a heresy when they've got 14 people in the entire church and maybe 100 people across the country? You know, the 93rd church of 4th Street. What authority do you have? You can't declare any kind of heresy with any kind of authority. You can't declare any kind of thing binding upon Protestantism, because it's every man for himself. Everyone makes it up himself. So anyway, so now you've got historical outcomes. Without Ottoman intervention, the Catholic Europe would have mounted a more effective suppression of Protestantism. Historians like Norman Housley and many others say that the Protestant Reformation would have faced severe challenges and even failure without the backing of the Ottomans. We've seen many, many historians say that. So, last 10 slides or so. Protestants, there were betrayers and there were sellouts. The conclusion here is that the Ottoman Empire's strategic support for the Protestant movements was a decisive factor in the Reformation and the geopolitical landscape of Southern Europe. There was military aid, there was financial support, there was diplomatic engagement, and there was a flood of literature, Islamic literature, into the West. And the Ottomans effectively held Protestant forces against Catholic adversaries, actively fighting to defeat the European defenders. So this alliance enabled the Protestant Reformation to thrive, but also significantly altered the course of European history. It is through Protestant-Lutheran collusion with the enemy that Europe was nearly defeated at the Battle of Vienna in 1683. It's a miracle. They won. It's an absolute miracle. Yes, of course, because, yes, I would. Would you consider Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses a part of the Protestant movement? Now, if you look at the 1800s, there was a radical push by Protestants to suddenly find the Bible to be historically illegitimate. And this, of course, led to this movement, the Great Awakening, that some like to talk about. It was the great awakening of heresy, basically, in the Protestants. So they were trying to debunk the Bible. This was another one of these Unitarian nonsenses that just popped up. But yes, these are Protestants. They're not Catholic. They are protesting. They are against the standard early Christian narrative. They're against these standard established traditions that are documented. So yes, because the Reformation opened up the door to heresy. It opened up to a flood of heresies. It recognized rejection of the Trinity and rejection of Jesus as Christ, as legitimate Christianity. I mean, they signed off on it and said, yeah, that's just as good as anything else. It is literally anti-Christian as defined by St. John, but they were like, yeah, that doesn't matter. That we don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. And the Muslims are nice. They're so nice, but they're antichrist. No, they're nice to us. They give us money. Do you know how much money we're making? That's all good. So so Timothy, there's a word for that. It starts with a B, it ends with a T, and the first word is the opposite of cow. Because I can say the same thing and then I disagree with you, and then what? How do you resolve that? There is absolutely no way to resolve that. There is no authority there. Anybody can say that, and the fact is that anybody has, and they've made up bullshit. The Unitarians make exactly the same argument. The Unitarians make exactly the same argument, and they are utterly contradictory. They deny the Trinity, and they make exactly the same argument, and they defend it from the Bible. Like, seriously, take a bit of logic, learn some basic logic, apply logic, and you'll see, like I said, starts with a B, ends with a T, first word, opposite of cow. Ave Maria says, it's so relevant for these times we're living in. You're truly a blessing. Well, thank you. This is far from what we learned, and I went to Catholic school. The US adopted Communist Russia's education system. Probably not that bad, but yeah, let's hope Trump managed to strip out a lot of those things. Yeah, neutering the church. I agree. There's some serious problems. Yeah, they're the unvented children of Protestantism. Exactly. I mean, how can okay? Take the 14th church. Take the 14th Baptist Church of 92nd Street, and they go, no, the Unitarians are not valid Christians. But the 15th church says, no, they're good. They're good stuff. Those Unitarians that reject the Trinity and reject Jesus as Christ, they're valid. Those are devout Christians. The best. They're just awesome. How do you resolve that? Because you both claim Bible alone and you make up your own theology as you go, and you all have 400 members in a world of 7 or 8 billion. How do you make that stick? How do you have any authority? You have no authority, none whatsoever. All you have is personal opinion. And when someone inside the church disagrees, he goes off and starts a church because priesthood of all believers, and I'm a priest and I'm just as good as anyone else, and my opinion is as valid as any apostles, and I've just started a church now, and I'm Apostle Mark, and I've just started a church. That's exactly what happens. It's exactly what happens. I mean, we know that is literally what has occurred. It's happening this week. It happened last week. It happened last month. It happened 20 years ago. It's happening all the time. So, to continue. Should we ship them weapons? Well, I mean, we should allow them to defend themselves. I think that is true. I think that governments need to support them, because what else do you have? You're going to send them kind words? That hasn't helped. Now they need help, and Islam needs to be stopped. It's a criminal enterprise. It needs to be stopped. Okay, so yes, Gabriel, I agree. The mess that the Reformers made cannot be overstated. And okay, so let me continue here. So it is through Protestant and Lutheran collusion with the enemy that Europe was nearly defeated at the Battle of Vienna. The Catholics saved Europe. when Protestants were literally betraying it, undermining it, stabbing their fellow Europeans in the back. Right, Unitarianism again, free religion. Let's have a look at Unitarians. Because remember, a lot of these guys are getting it from the Bible alone, sola scriptura. And I read the Bible and it says, yeah, Jesus is not God. Phew, no Trinity. Bible alone. So in a comprehensive study of the Free Religious Association, Professor Stowe Persons write that it was conceived by the extreme radicals as a radical Muslims, no, radical Christians, good grief, as a substitute for the organization of Unitarianism. In a real sense, it was sort of a mutual protection for those dissenters who would not submit to the yoke of Christ, as prescribed in the National Unitarian Conference. They wouldn't submit to the yoke of Christ. So they started a free religious movement. The FRA was prompted by purely negative considerations. Men needed a new fellowship to replace the old one no longer available. Because no, we can't do that Catholic thing, right? Martin Luther said that was evil, that was antichrist. And maybe maybe this is what's called the slippery slope towards Islam. We'll see if that bears out. You never know. But yes, it does, of course. So the FRA, so free religion emerged from Unitarianism, and it did so simply by moving further to the theological left. Can you say LGBT and woke? Its major criticism of Christianity centered around authoritarianism. Yeah, you can't tell us what to do, you see, because we are free thinkers. We do free religion. We make things up as we go. We can't have rules because the Holy Spirit lays itself on my heart and it tells me that Jesus is not God and that Jesus was a black man. And you can't tell me I'm wrong because the Holy Spirit's talking to me, you bigots. And they don't want fixed beliefs because maybe Jesus was a woman tomorrow. You see, maybe tomorrow I'll feel like Jesus was a woman. You know, maybe God is a woman. Maybe God is bisexual. I don't know. This is free religion. I don't want fixed beliefs. I want to make things up. Maybe I'm a woman. What the heck? You see, free religion. Can't have these fixed rules. That's authoritarian. 1 + 1 can't equal 2. That's a fixed belief. That's authoritarian. Can't have that. And they wanted the promotion of pure religion, a return to the original pure religion of whatever the imagination says it was. And they encouraged the scientific study of theology, scientific theology. Yeah, we all need that stuff. We all need that. We definitely need lots of that. So let me see. Christ isn't the head of the church again. Timothy, you know what? Fuck off. Seriously. Okay, you can leave. Thanks. Bye-bye. Excuse my French, but really, I really don't have time for idiocy, and I don't have time for idiots, because that is sophistry. That's not answering the question. That is a dodge. That is just peppering with multiple questions like a shotgun because you can't answer the question. How do you settle a theological dispute? You know you can't answer it. And please excuse me, but this is not the first time I've had these stupid answers by stupid people who are running sophistry, not truth, who are making it up as they go. This is like the millionth time I've dealt with it in the last 5 years. I'm not interested in seeing it again. It's an old movie, seen it before, know exactly how it ends. You can't answer the questions. You're going to be utterly irrational and don't have time for it. So thanks. So return to the original religion of Abraham. That's what Muhammad 1 meant these guys are searching for. Correct. There's a little bit of Islam going on there. So they speak of the emancipation of religious belief and life from allegiance to all authority, save that of truth as determined by rational human intelligence. You know, by opinion is what they mean, by personal opinion. You see, by personal, you can't tell me what to think, like Timothy was letting us know, but what about this, and what about that, and what about that, and what about that, and what about that? Because Timothy doesn't want to be told. Timothy wants to follow his own opinion because the Holy Spirit wasn't lying to him, right? The voices in his head are God, right? That's the Holy. He's got God on speed dial, straight to his heart, laying the message on his heart, which is complete Gnostic trash. Don't need to apologize, Lloyd. People need to be called out for bad behavior. Yeah, although people, there are those who will say, well, Lloyd, you need to be a little more Christian in your language. I'm like, look, sorry, man, I'm not theological, I'm tactical. Okay, trust me, this is rubber. It's rubber. I have this right here. I've got a ton of weapons here. Seriously, I didn't come out of theological seminary. I came out of from learning not to be killed. So different mindset. Shotgun apologetics, sophist bullcrap. Yes, exactly. You can't tell me, but I can tell you. That's a very good point. Or yeah, you don't know, you can't be sure, except he's 100% certain that you're wrong. He's 100% sure that you are dead wrong. Yeah, the Holy Spirit guides me. I'm tired of that too. The Holy Spirit guides me and the Bible tells me so. Yeah, the arrogance is insane. It's Gnosticism. Yeah, so let me see. Okay, so they've got emancipation of religious belief and life from allegiance to all authority except that of truth as determined by your personal opinion. Timothy, case in point. Now, Darwin, Protestant Unitarian. Charles Darwin, the crazy psychopath, the guy who was taking Muslim theology, Sufi theology, slapping the label science on it and saying, hey, I've got a new theory that I took from Sufi poetry and pagan Greeks. It's genuine science. It's called it's called evolution, and I didn't get it from the Sufis, from the Muslims at all. Promise, pinky swear. Didn't steal it from Muslim Sufi poets at all. No, it's not pagan. It's not pagan beliefs from Greeks. No, definitely not. It's definitely science. Definitely science. Not Muslim beliefs at all. And I didn't like killing small animals like psychopaths do. Only killed thousands, but that was an accident. Did it for science. Robert Darwin, his father was a free thinker, the son of the renowned poet, doctor, free thinker, dissenter, and libertine Erasmus Darwin. Let's have a look and see where these free thinking ideas led to, like atheism. Free thinkers are also known as atheists. His mother, Susanna, was the daughter of the famous and prosperous Josiah Wedgwood, a maker of fine pottery and a Unitarian dissenter. In the shadow of the French Revolution, free thinkers, dissenters from the Church of England, and those of more democratic leanings, theological left, had become suspect in England. So they had Charles baptized at St. Chad's Anglican Church as a cover because they didn't really believe in it. Susanna remained true to her Unitarianism and brought Charles to the Unitarian chapels on Sundays. Was he a Christian or Unitarian? Because that's anti-Christ, so I don't think he was Christian. She died when he was 8. Okay, great. Darwin was a Protestant Unitarianism. Christine says, Lloyd, this is your channel and you're sharing your vast knowledge with the audience. Don't apologize for not tolerating comments geared to create distractions. Thank you. Yeah, I just don't have the patience. Prots do have a tendency to worship science like a religion, yes. So, yeah, you have to, same like, yes, exactly, 100%. Or they had tolerance and diversity. The Protestants were tolerating the Protestants and they were encouraging diversity. In other words, divide and rule, divide and conquer. Split. Same like tolerance and diversity. You have to tolerate me, but I don't have to tolerate you. Same source. 100% agreed. Let me see. Like a bad child who refuses to obey by incessantly saying, but why? Exactly, Catherine. I fully agree with you there. Porfirio says most Protestants will say we have the right to read the Bible however we want, and these are the same ones that will attack anyone who interprets the gospel that correctly affirm Mary as the mother of God. Yeah. I'm not theological, I'm tactical. That's an action movie quote. Yeah, it's kind of, yeah, I'm, what can I say? I mean, trust the pagans, science, 100%, yes. And I would agree with you, Zeal. Yes, they've purposely divided and conquered, and that is true. Okay, let me finish this one. So, as Erasmus Darwin would have described Unitarianism a century later, a feathered bed to catch a falling Christian. It was you see, it's a slippery slope. You move out of Christianity and you come to Protestantism and you come to Unitarianism. Your next step is atheism. You see, it's kind of deism and then atheism. Let's just say from Unitarianism, Islamic monotheism, to deism and then atheism. It's a slippery slope. That's all it is. It's a slippery slope. And boom, the next thing you're a Muslim. So his maternal grandfather, Josiah Wedgwood, was a Unitarian. His paternal one, Erasmus Darwin, a notorious atheist, free thinker. And his father was probably an atheist. Yeah, free thinker, read atheist. In the words of his biographer, Janet Brown, the autobiography was just as much an exercise in camouflage, in other words, telling lies, a disguise, as it was a methodical laying out the bare bones of his existence. They were just lying about his theology because the man was a raving lunatic, a psychopath, and loved to kill small animals. Okay, so let me see. Learn 2. Roman Catholicism literally created Islam. That is the word for that. The correct term for that, learn 2, is that's fucking stupid. Now piss off. So, moving on. Okay, so now moving on. Hopefully got that. Okay, so moving on. Okay, let's continue. Sorry, just getting distracted there by idiots and fools. Look, that was evidence that fools can learn to type, but not learn to think. So ignorance is certainly bliss. Now, they write here, see my Darwin and God, London 2009, and more recently John von Wey and Mark J. Pollan's The Anti-Hypothesis. Did the death of his daughter cause Darwin to give up Christianity? I did an 8-part, I believe, Darwin series. Darwin was not a Christian. He was anything but. Darwin was anything but a Christian. He detested Christianity. His theology was anti-Christian, which argues that Darwin had fully abandoned his Christianity sometime before his death. The death wasn't a catalyst. He was already an anti-Christian. He was already a Unitarian long before. Unitarian eugenics. Janice Oliver says, Lloyd, I'm fascinated. You are South African. Yes, I'm South African. But you live in Poland. You have no reference to your South African roots. Where did you develop your incredible knowledge in this subject? Janice, thank you. I have 700 videos plus on this channel now. I've done over 700 of these. I've got 180, 190 presentations. I spend hours. I spend up to 6 hours a day, 7 hours a day researching, writing notes, editing, reading. It's quite a bit of work. I mean, today I spent several hours on this. So I just came across information that it's just a rabbit hole I went down, and I just never stopped going down the rabbit hole. And I also have software. I used to work with advanced military systems, and I learned to work with very, very complex multi-million-dollar systems. It's very complex systems of systems, and it's just the kind of thinking you develop to design things that have to hang together in your head, making multiple systems work together, synchronize. So yeah, just kind of that led me to software that I use that can index and find data across thousands of documents, thousands of books. So I can put in a few thousand books into a document. I'm just tell it index these, which takes a long time, and then I can find links between them. So I've been working with technology of that type long before it became common. Can you make what? Oriente book? What is that? I have no idea what that is. Protestants will say we should have a personal relationship with Jesus, and when you show them Mary's deep relationship with God, they'll freak out. Yes. Living in the Middle East does lead to a little bit of self-awakening. Yeah, Darwin was a little bit of a nutcase. No, he was. Okay, some will point to a religious spin-off movement from Protestantism at the time known as the social gospel. We should call it the socialist gospel movement, of course, led mostly by Congregationalist and Unitarian ministers, in which did indeed support the eugenics movement. Of course, not Christian. However, this organization was hardly in line with mainstream Christianity, Catholicism, or Judaism. While every broad movement will find adherents amongst the millions of pastors, priests, reverends, and rabbis throughout the world, it does not mean that the faiths actually adopted them. Yeah, you'll find some whack jobs. You'll find some whack job Catholics, for sure. You'll find some whack job Jews. That doesn't mean that he's Orthodox. That doesn't mean that he's part of doctrine. It just means you've got an idiot in the rows, right? It means the eugenics movement was able to contort even some of the faithful to their message. Now, the Unitarian movement, this is their bread and butter. Likewise, the social gospel reconceived Christianity as being less about faith and salvation and more about ushering in the kingdom of God on earth through social reform and service, through socialist reform, socialism. You need some of that. The kingdom of God on earth. I believe Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world, but these guys are making a utopia like the socialists do. I wonder if this is a bit of theocracy and a little bit of, maybe, who knows? Maybe if we just have the perfect laws, then we can have, like the sharia, then we can have perfect behavior. Many social gospel adherents viewed eugenics as God's plan to reconcile the truths of science with the Bible. Now you understand what they mean by scientific Christianity, an interest in science. Yeah, we just need to kill off all those black people that are inferior and then kill off those genes, and then you'll have a perfect world because you'll have the most intelligent, because that's what Darwin was teaching. Oh boy, good grief, where's this going? This looks like genocide. Did Darwin help genocide? Yes, he did. Of course he did. Towards this end, Bible verses were reinterpreted and found to contain what had heretofore been secret eugenics messages. These Unitarians, they're so funny. They found secret eugenics messages, which means that we've got to remove from the population certain groups we don't like. Thus, in one minister's sermon, Noah's flood was God's own eugenics policy for eliminating a human race that had degraded. And those Christians, they got it all wrong. They are blasphemers. They get it all wrong. Maybe we got to get... Do you understand where this is going? Can you see the problem here with these people? Yeah. Yes, yeah. Even Jeffrey Epstein was very pro-eugenics, very humble. Yeah, there's lots of issues going around. Darwin was a racist. Oh, certainly. Yeah. So, social justice gospel. Yes. So, yeah. So, can we see some of the issues that we have here? Can we see some of the issues here where you, once they've lost the tether of Christianity, these people go off the rails, right? This is where they've gone. Catherine, it should be noted that Muslims have their own form of Kabbalah. They've got their own version of it. They've actually spun off their own version ages ago. So, Michael Roos, Protestant wokeness. Moreover, some existing religions have been taken over by non-belief, the religion's unbelief, incorporating into already existing social structures. So one thinks, for instance, of the Unitarian Universalists. They deny the Trinity, but they used to be fervent believers in a deity. No more. Now we just get ethical principles. Yeah, like atheists. The inherent worth and dignity of every person, like atheists. Justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Oh, they mean woke. Yeah, woke. Respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Woke. And that sort of thing, information taken from the Unitarian Universalist website. But this religiosity is certainly not to every non-believer's taste. Having given up Christianity, rather than tying ribbons on trees and hugging trees, and they would rather spend their Sunday mornings reading the papers and going out to brunch, because that's religious, I guess. I mentioned this article. This is well worth reading. It's actually very interesting. From some interesting points the guy raises here. And let's continue. So that's just an interesting article. Now, this is Jonathan Lyon Israel. He's written some very interesting books on this topic. I've already quoted him earlier, and he mentioned that the French Revolution and various other radical movements all involved Unitarians, these monotheists. Right? This is from the newhumanist.org, and he writes, Jonathan Israel states that the Socinians aimed for a complete elimination of religious authority. So you go from Socinians, who are heretics, all the way to atheists who are anti-Christian, directly anti-Christian. Both the Socinians and the early Unitarians were inspired by the notion of equality derived from their radical Protestant roots. Equality to equity. Yeah, the slippery slope. They advocated for political liberty, equality, and social justice, woke, viewing these as extensions of their theological beliefs. And that's a theocracy, because now they've got to take these ideas, these religious ideas, woke religion, and make them law, because men now have babies, apparently. This radical egalitarianism can be seen as a precursor to the political thought espoused by early Freemasons, who often viewed themselves as builders of a moral society free from both ecclesiastical, church authority, and monarchical oppression. Oh boy, Freemasons. Now I want to bring up Monsignor George F. Dillon, a Catholic priest, wrote a very interesting book, Grand Orient Freemasonry Unmasked, as the secret power behind communism. Did we say socialist justice anywhere? Anti-Trinitarianism, yes, denying how God presents himself to us in actual history. Take care, Rory. And let's see. Yeah, that's perfectly congruent, Catherine M. says. So he mentions here the success of Faustus Socinus, Faust, I wonder if that has anything to do with Faust, in spreading his uncle's theories was enormous. His aim was not only to destroy the church, which is the same parallel as that of what the Muslims want, to destroy the church, to destroy Christianity, but to raise up another temple into which any enemy of orthodoxy might freely enter. Into this temple, every heterodox or unorthodox or heretical belief might be held. It was called Christian, but was without Christian faith, or hope, or love. It was simply an astutely planned system for propagating the ideas of its founders. For a fundamental part of the policy of Socinius, and one in which he well instructed his disciples, was to associate either to Unitarianism, Unitarianism, that comes back, and he wished, therefore, that all his adherents should, whether Lutheran or Calvinist, Oh, so the Lutherans and the Calvinists were involved with the Unitarians. That's fascinating. They must treat one another as brothers, and hence his disciples have been called at various times the United Brethren, the Polish brothers, the Moravian brothers, or brother Masons, and finally just Freemasons. Fascinating. Yeah, equality to equity versus charity and justice. Oh, wow, is that the burning coal in their pants to reject the Trinity, the Unitarians, early political unions like Freemasonry? Yeah, let's just say there's some weirdness going on here. All right, Freemasons. Let's continue. 1747 is a date here, but the real secret of Freemasonry consisted even then in disbelief in the divinity of Christ and a determination to replace that doctrine, which is the very foundation of Christianity, by naturalism or rationalism. Rationalism, free thinkers, rationalism. We don't believe that superstitious miracle nonsense. We believe in the five senses. Materialism. We're atheists. We reject these things a priori. Yeah, rationalism, opinion, because we also don't believe in objective reality. We believe in subjective reality because we're nominalists. Yeah, and Socinianus, having established his sect in Poland, sent emissaries to preach his doctrines stealthily in Germany, Holland, and England. Oh, the three big states that were really, really big on the whole anti-Catholic movement. I wonder, just coincidence, I'm sure. In Germany, Protestants and Catholics united to unmask them. But in Holland, they blended with the Anabaptists. And the Anabaptists, as you know, I believe they were into, shall we say, polygamy, marrying multiple wives. There's a Muslim guy called, I always forget his name. His name is like Muhammad something. There's a Muslim guy that was also into marrying multiple wives, and the Anabaptists took that on board, and the Anabaptists were also called Anabapto-Turcus, just like you had Calvino-Turkism, as in, because Calvinism was a blend of the Turkish Muslim theology as well as Calvin's theology blended. So this Islamic Christian blend, Calvino-Turkism. At one time, it was also called Anabapto-Turkism because it was kind of Anabaptist Muslim heresy. Yeah, good grief. I think, therefore I can ignore God. Exactly. I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore, what does God call himself? The I am. I think, therefore I am God. Descartes. That's all it is. Yes, I covered a few episodes. I have a few episodes on my channel. I've got short videos on Margaret Sanger. I have 2 or 3 episodes on that. She was, yeah. Ignatius says, synchronism of contradictions and personal opinions covered by the terms charity and unity and so on. Yeah, subjective interpretation because they're nominalists. That is kind of weird, isn't it? Did Lloyd announce it's his birthday? No, my birthday is September the 1st, just so by the way. Okay, so in Holland, they blended with the Anabaptists. So these Protestant sects all have become something less than Christian, let's just say. Let's continue. And the Abbé Lefranc believes that Oliver Cromwell was a Socinian. What did Oliver Cromwell do? Well, he destroyed all of the Catholic artwork. He was just like Calvin, just like the Muslims. He was just like the Taliban in Afghanistan that destroyed all the statues. It's exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. Just like the Taliban won't allow icons, Oliver Cromwell was no different. Oliver Cromwell was a Socinian, devout Christian in other words, and he introduced Freemasonry into England. If he was a Socinian, we can easily understand how the secret society of Vicenza could have attractions for one of his anti-Catholic and ambitious sentiments. Yeah, now you know why they're all anti-Catholic, because they're all off the rails. He gave its members in England the title of Freemasons, and he invented the allegory of the Temple of Solomon, now so much used by Masonry. The original state of man is supposed to be a commonwealth of equality called socialism. The Russians love it. The Soviets they've got a political system for you. And with a vague deism as its religion, because yeah, it helps if you don't believe in God, because then you'll morally be opposed to this trash. But yeah, we need a vague deism, so the slippery slope towards atheism. This temple destroyed by Christ was to be restored by Freemasonry after Christ and the Christian order should be obliterated by conspiracy and revolution. The Protestant Revolution. Reformation, Revolution. Reformation, Revolution. The state of nature was the Hiram Abiff, whose murder Masonry was to avenge, and which, having previously removed Christ, was to resuscitate Hiram by rebuilding the temple of nature as it had been before. And that's Grand Orient Freemasonry Unmasked, as the secret power behind communism, by Monsignor George F. Dillon from 1884. So, last few slides, 5 slides. Yeah, she said she was just advocating for women's reproductive rights and for socialism because she was a communist. Yes, total communist. Total communist. So let's see. Let me see if I've missed anything. Philip says, so many of these things sound similar because the devil has no ability to create. He just recycles heresies. Yes. Okay. So the roots of Unitarian Universalism trace back to Protestantism and liberal Christianity. More specifically, can be traced to Unitarianism and Christian Universalism. This is actually an article that Unitarian Universalists state that these traditions provide a deep regard for intellectual freedom, as in, don't tell me what to do. I'll think whatever the hell I please. Doesn't matter about facts and logic. And inclusive love, free love, 1960s. Remember that? Free love, 1960s? Free love, just jag everyone, anyone, anytime. Congregations and members seek inspiration and insight from all major world religions. The beliefs of the individual Unitarian Universalists vary widely. They may include religious humanism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Sikhism, Buddhism, Taoism. Yeah, the religion of there's a word for that. When everything is good, everything's the same, there's a word for it. It's another heresy. That's a well-known heresy. Atheism, agnosticism, New Age beliefs, omnism, pantheism, panentheism, pandeism, deism, teachings of the Baha'i. Yeah. So there you go. All right. The UUA is not a member of the World Council of Churches or the National Council of Churches. Its website reveals no mention of Jesus Christ. And they're Christians and they want to tell you, right? It states that Unitarians embrace values from various religious traditions, including Christianity. Unitarian churches and members of the UUA have been pastored by Buddhists, a Buddhist in charge of and these people like to claim they're Christians, right? And include Wiccans as, witches who go dance naked in the forests. A member or minister of a Unitarian church can identify as Christian, but not accept the deity of Jesus Christ or the Trinity. That's called contradiction. But of course, they don't believe in Aristotelian logic. They don't believe in contradiction. They believe in personal feelings, their feelings. Yeah. Anti-Catholic or pro-Islamic. So these Protestants, were they pro-Islamic or anti-Catholic, or a little bit of both? Were they anti-Europe? Yeah, they definitely were. All of these, there were all 3 of these. They were anti-Catholic, they were pro-Islamic, and they were anti-Europe. So Protestantism ensured that Europe would be incapable of a united front against Islamic invasions of Europe from 1400 to 1700. Europe, outside of the Balkans, was saved from Islamization by Polish, Austrian, Spanish, Hungarian, and Italian Catholic resistance to Islam. Notice Catholic resistance to Islam, not Protestant resistance. The Protestants bent over and held out the Vaseline. Okay, the Eastern Orthodox were largely siding with or being dominated by the Ottomans. Yeah, less said about them, the better right now. And Protestants and the treacherous French were warring against those resisting Islam. I mean, the French had this on-off thing going on, and the French. So the history is clear. Protestantism benefited Islam. It benefited Islam militarily, making common cause and allying with Islam against Catholicism and thus against the rest of Europe. It is a miracle that Europe did not fall to Islamic invasions from 1400 to 1700. Why? Because the Catholics fought and died, and the Protestants sold out for money. Especially when you consider the damage that Protestantism did to Europe in the same period. The Schmalkaldic War, 1540, the French Wars of Religion, 1560s to 1590s, the 30 Years' War, 1610s to 1640s, the 80 Years' War, the Polish-Swedish Wars, 1600s to 1620s, the Russo-Polish War, 1610s, the campaigns of John Hunyadi, the 1440s, and others, and more. So, the battles that halted the spread of Islam were Catholic victories. The Siege of Belgrade, 1444, the Reconquista, When you go through the history, you'll find a date will shift by a year, so whatever. It's just how it is. Reconquista, 1492. The first Ottoman siege of Vienna, 1529. The Battle of Lepanto, 1571. The Battle of Hotten, 1610. And the second siege of Vienna, 1683. So the Catholics stopped this. The Protestants were too busy playing Cody. The Catholics fought and died, and the Protestants, they were on the payroll, as was well said earlier. Yes, I know, Logmaker. I've repeated this like a dozen times already, and I've mentioned it probably twice today already. Okay, so in a nutshell, this is how the 1500s and 1600s went. Catholics fought Muslims, Protestants, and the Eastern Orthodox. So they were fighting, the Catholics were fighting the Muslims, the Protestants, and the Eastern Orthodox. And the Eastern Orthodox and the Catholics and the Protestants were fighting on the side of the Muslims, aiding and abetting the Muslims. So Muslims were largely defeated by the Catholics, but they conquered the Eastern Orthodox. And then they used them to fight the Catholics, with the exception of Russia, who fought the Catholics and the Muslims. And of course, the Ottomans were responsible for the rise of Russia. So, yeah. So, cui bono, as someone asked earlier, I believe that was Silver asked. So guys, I'll pause here for a moment. So look, if you do like the material, I know it's not necessarily what you like to hear or want to hear. I understand some people are triggered by this, and they prefer the comfortable lies that they have been told rather than these very uncomfortable historical truths that anyone can go and reference. Anyone can go look at the papers. Anyone can go and check the historical dates, the facts. Yeah. But if you like it, please do like it, do share it, do subscribe, put it on your social media. And again, thank you for the support. It is always really appreciated. So, cui bono, who benefits? Well, the Muslims benefit. Islam benefits. So the Protestants fought the Catholics, and they caused endless civil wars and wars of independence, and they allied with the Muslims. And the English and the Dutch have a starring role in this whole thing. Starring role, very, very important role here. France did undermine the Catholic cause by periodically allying with the Ottomans and the Protestants to counter the Catholic Habsburgs, because they did that for personal gain. France wanted to be a political power in the Catholic world, and of course the Habsburgs were, and so they sold out. Catholics kept the Christian cause alive against Islam. Protestants, well, they were stabbing Europe in the back. Protestants and the Eastern Orthodox conspired against them. So Protestant propaganda, don't forget, we've read Luther and others. Their whole propaganda was against defending against the Muslim invasions. They were like, yeah, let them in. Open the borders and let them in. You deserve it. Okay, they're doing it today again. Did large parts of Europe need to erupt in sectarian violence to reform the church? No. I mean, think about it. We have a problem with indulgences. The Catholics are taking money. What is the solution, Martin Luther? The solution is we need to remove these 7 books that I don't like from the Bible. Shouldn't we stop the indulgences? No, I don't like these 7 books. Sola Scriptura, the Bible is sacred. Yeah, the Bible's sacred. These books are crap. Throw them out. Thanks, Martin. Moving on. Did multiple books need to be removed to fix indulgences? Also no. Unitarian minister Samuel Clarke, who lived from 1675 to 1729, revised the Book of Common Prayer. He removed the Trinitarian Nicene Creed and references to Jesus as God. Theophilus Lindsay also revised the Book of Common Prayer to have a more tolerant, free Unitarian interpretation, private, personal, subjective, opinionated interpretation. Neither cleric was charged, oddly enough, because Protestantism allows heresy. Protestantism is extremely tolerant of heresy, even Islam, because maybe they make money. I don't know, maybe they got given money to do it. Under the Blasphemy Act, neither cleric was charged under the Blasphemy Act of 1697 in England that made it an offense for any person educated in or having made profession of Christian religion by writing, preaching, teaching, or advised speaking to deny the Holy Trinity. This is the Act of Toleration in 1689 that gave relief to English dissenters, but it excluded the Unitarians. Yeah, so it was okay for those guys to do, just like the Ottomans were doing for them back in the day. And what is odd is that this is modeled on the Sharia blasphemy laws. Are you surprised that blasphemy laws are making their way back in England? Because this is modeled on blasphemy laws that the Muslims used. It was in England back in the day, and it's coming back today. It is back today. Gabriel Hernandez says, I would say that Protestantism encourages heresy, whatever it takes to take the Catholic Church down. And that is exactly what they did. They were willing. Bubblegum Man. you can also fuck off. Okay, right. Now, let me continue. Okay, so you can actually read more about this on wikipedia.org, Wiki Unitarian Universalism. You'll find some interesting information about Unitarianism there. So my last couple of slides. This was kind of random. This was comments I was looking at in different YouTube videos and stuff. People were writing some completely random stuff. So obviously, I forgot to edit these. That's crazy. I forgot to edit these slides. Yeah, so I'll skip all this. Yeah, this was someone's reply to someone else in the chat. So, wow, this was some mad interesting. Yeah. Anyway, this is an interesting point. So you want to blame Catholics for the Protestants. We blame you for Jehovah's Witnesses, Unitarians, modalism. Yeah, these heresies were not held in check by the Catholic Church anymore. Under the Protestants, these heresies ran wild. These heresies just absolutely ran wild. Okay, so, and of course he mentions here the Orthodox churches were founded by Mehmed the Conqueror and Gennadius Scholarius. Yes, how many churches did the Protestants found under the Ottoman rule? I mean, how many churches did the Ottomans encourage that were anti-Catholic? How many heresies did the Ottomans encourage? Probably all of them at the time. Hang on, Lloyd, be fair, the blasphemy laws in the UK is only to protect the poor defenseless Muslims. You're right. Sorry, man. Sorry. As the Unitarians will say, as the Protestants were saying back in the Reformation, somebody think of the Muslims, not somebody think of the children, but please, somebody think of the Muslims. What about the Muslims? Somebody, please be tolerant here. You're not being tolerant of Islam, you bigots. Okay, so yes, the Germans did certainly. Catherine says, I'm wondering if Luther couldn't get special Catholic dispensation to marry his little cousin with his other 3 wives. I have no idea, but the stories I've read about his wife, apparently she was the village bicycle. So when he was out and about doing his thing on, traveling to preach, apparently she was getting around. So, apparently so. So let me see. The Ottomans were ultimately destroyed by England, the Protestant power. The Ottomans had destroyed themselves because they were destroyed by the Catholics. They were destroyed by the Polish in 1683, and they lost power. And eventually they gave up in 1699, and they just declined after that. But the English had already sold out, and they'd enabled massive damage in Europe. But anyway, this guy obviously comes late in the game and wants to come with a different narrative. So yeah, I've got very little patience for any of that kind of thing. Okay, so let's look at ecumenism. This is my last 2 slides. Evil ecumenism that always somehow benefits Islam. Now notice the Catholic Church does speak of ecumenism, and what little that I've looked into the topic, they speak of ecumenism in a social sense, but not in a religious sense, because you can't combine contradictories. You have to choose one. But they say, look, we need to find ways to get along socially, but I believe they make a distinction in terms of doctrine. They make a distinction in terms of what is religious doctrine, which is incompatible. Right? So yeah, that'll make Luther a little bitter, but I don't know if he was. Luther, remember in the one letter that I've shown this on my channel, Martin Luther writes to his wife that the sight of a naked prostitute isn't working for him anymore. So he writes that seeing prostitutes naked is no longer having an effect on him. So he's writing to his wife to tell her this. I know, you tell me. So Calvinist Islam. Yeah, it looks like it. Calvino-Turkism referred to the approach of, so just the summary in the last 2 slides, refers to the approach of Transylvania towards the Ottoman Empire during the 16th century. This was labeled at the time as Calvino-Turkism or Anabaptismo-Turkism due to their relations with Islam. Yes, the Ottomans lasted so long because of the British and French. They were supported by them. So Jacobus Paleologus, who died in 1585, was a Catholic who became radicalized in the anti-Trinitarian movement, for instance. He cultivated a wide range of very highly placed contacts and correspondence in the imperial, royal, and aristocratic households in Eastern Europe and in the Ottoman Empire. This is another vector for how these ideas spread. He tried to simplify Christianity, just like, these accretions that Catholicism had brought into Christianity that were false, just like Luther and Calvin and all these other semi-Muslim, semi-Islamic theologies, in a way that resonated more with Islam and Judaism, just like Michael Servetus. Isn't that just a sheer coincidence? And he wanted to create a syncretic religious formula called universal religion. Universal religion. Well, it wasn't Catholicism, it was Islamic. And the differences between Christianity, Islam, and Judaism were rejected as fabrications. There's no difference. They're all the same. There's a name for that heresy. I can never remember the blinking name for the heresy. Indifferentism. It's the heresy of indifferentism. You think everything's the same. 1 + 1 is equal to any number you like. We're indifferent. By 1554, Paleologos was back east in the Dominican convent of St. Peter in Pera, the Latin Christian quarter of Constantinople. Wonder if you got any Muslim ideas in Constantinople under the Ottomans? Probably not. And it was here that he developed a lifelong adherence to anti-Trinitarian teachings of Michael Servetus, and he composed a defense of Servetus's doctrines against the denunciations by John Calvin. He believed that being a Muslim did not exclude you from salvation, and proposed a minimalist creed that imitated the Islamic Shahada. So we've got more of these people coming out of the woodwork, borrowing from Islam, just like Michael Servetus. And he influenced the Unitarians in Transylvania. So this was direct from the Ottoman Empire to Transylvania, making the Shahada in Christianity. Great. And the movement was influenced by John Calvin and the religious practices of the Ottoman Empire. That's not supposed to happen because the Protestant Reformation was 100% pure Christianity. Pure. 100% pure. Totally pure. Untouched by Islam, except for where it was touched by Islam. And very Islamic. And the movement aimed to simplify Christianity and eliminate dogmas that contravened Islam. Please, somebody think of the Muslims. Somebody, please think of the Muslims. So, anyway, it must not contravene Islam and Judaism in order to produce an Islam-friendly ecumenism. Oh boy. Final slide. Last slide. So yeah. You guys can let me know if this sounded like the collected rantings of an insane South African living in Poland, or if this actually made some sort of historical sense, and it showed that the history you were taught at school, university, and in Sunday school is not exactly full of the right details. It might be missing a few pieces here and there. So, Islamo-Protestantism rises. Quick summary, last slide, then we're done. The Reformation was politically motivated, more than theologically or philosophically. French Calvinists argued that an Ottoman alliance must be used against Catholic Spain. So, why did they wear onions on their heads? I have no idea. Suleiman the Magnificent was the 10th and the longest reigning sultan at the Ottoman Empire from 1520 to 1566. He invaded or conquered 15 European states. Where the heck were the Protestants when it came to joining together and fighting? Well, they were too busy fighting each other over theology to join up, and actually division is division. Sola Scriptura brings division. It doesn't bring unity. Yeah, he invaded Belgrade, 1521, Rhodes, 1522, Hungary, 1526, Serbia, 1537 to 1540, Croatia, 1537 to 1540, Transylvania, 1541 to 1544, Moldavia, 1538 to 1552, Wallachia, 1538 to 1552, and of course Vienna in 1529 and 1532. The Protestant princes of German states received money from Suleiman the Magnificent in their efforts to establish Lutheranism in Germany in 1555. The Sultan also offered his help to the Lutheran princes from the Netherlands and a whole bunch of other places. The main factor for the expansion of Lutheranism in Europe was the Ottoman menace, which, this is a quote from a scholar, Daniel Goffman, which directly encouraged Protestantism, as in northern Hungary and Transylvania, where Calvino-Turkism became the dominant religion. The Ottomans knew that by encouraging Protestantism everywhere, they would force the Habsburgs to divide their forces, thus the Turks and the Protestants of the 16th century probably saved one another. The influence of the Ottoman threat on the Protestant Reformation. That's an article by Sheikh Zulfikar. You've seen that, and I've quoted some other articles. So, yeah, that article I showed you earlier, I dropped that in the chat. And I dropped the other article in the chat, and that is the end of that. So connected more pieces of the puzzle, Lloyd. Okay, so I'm glad that helped. Thoroughly enjoying it. Thank you very much, Bernadette. Michael pt6 says they called him Suleiman the Magnificent because anyone who called him Suleiman the Big Head didn't live long. I think that's probably 100% true. So, okay, so yeah, so guys, is there anyone who'd like to come up for a minute? So you might want to say something, otherwise I will call it a night. Isn't that a big fat surprise? Yeah, and fascinating, yeah. So yeah, I mean, if there's anyone who would like to come up, just drop a line now in the chat. I'll let you come up for a minute or two, not too long, to just offer a thought or a comment if anyone would like to. Otherwise, that finishes this particular series, and I'll be working on something else. I'm busy working on something with the theological overlap of Islam with Calvinism. And I expect I'll do that with Osama Daktok, who's interested in talking more about that. And so I'm going to have to work on those notes over the next few days and see how that takes me. Sergeant Grinch says, thank you for the series. Thank you, Grinch. Glad to have you. Ave Maria Theotokos says, very edifying. Thank you, Lloyd. You're very welcome. No, I appreciate the company on this journey. Gabriel Hernandez says, Lloyd, my wife and I homeschool our kids. Do you have any studies that would be appropriate? Yes, I saw that. I was looking at that. What kind of studies would you think would be useful? Look, I've done a number of series on Hitler, I don't know if it's appropriate for an 8 or 15-year-old. That's the only problem. I can send you the notes, and you can always take them through those. I've done some detailed studies on Hitler, for instance, on questions around Hitler's theology and so on. Was he a Christian? Debunking that whole claim, the claim of Hitler's Pope, because we know we've got Hitler's Protestants, Hitler's Reformer, and so on. The stuff on socialism and atheism would be very interesting, as well as the stuff on Darwin. So if you want, I mean, if you're willing to do that yourself rather than have them listen to me on YouTube, that might be helpful to that. The Protestants hate each other, but all collectively dislike my Catholic parish. Yeah, some things don't die. And that Jesus, thanks, Lord. Very interesting information. Yeah, thank you. Christine, you are welcome. Okay. So, yeah, Gabriel. So there's a couple of guys I need to get back to. So hold on. Okay, I need to do this now so I do not forget. George, I need to get back to you by email. And also, Raf, Mad Monkey, I need to get back to you as well. So let me do that before I forget. Thank you, Century Sense. There's another amazing stream. Thank you. So before I forget, I need to get back to a couple of people. And both would be great. Yeah, so Gabriel, just drop me a line, to my email. It's easy to find me. It's really easy. Find my email. When is the previous government and the party never demolished mosques but Catholic churches? Yeah, well, they were Calvinist. The South African government, the Afrikaners are generally Calvinist by leaning. Over Texas, I would look into Tridium. There are programs that start around 10 or so that would help in developing thinking. That could be useful. So if anybody wanted to come up, like I said, I'll give it another moment to see if anyone wants to come up. Hard pill to swallow. The Turin Shroud talks, hard pill to swallow. Thanks, Lloyd. Yeah, you know what's crazy? I got people coming on and saying things like, you know what, you need to focus on Islam rather than focusing on these irrelevant facts that you're using to divide Christianity. I'm like, what's irrelevant about Protestants literally quoting the Quran to disprove the Bible? Quoting the Quran to say that this is why the Bible is wrong, because look what the Quran says. The Quran says, and we need to follow the example of Muhammad. Like, how the heck is that Christian? How's that irrelevant? How is it irrelevant that Protestants are literally stabbing Europe in the back by helping, physically bringing an army to help the Muslims conquer Europe? How's that irrelevant? How is any of this irrelevant? I mean, it's like, it's a bitter pill to swallow. It's a hard pill to swallow, but should be introduced for 8th graders. I believe it's too shocking to believe. Yeah. So thank you for the information. Texas says, I knew some, but only vague or surface level. Let's help flesh it out. Look, there's a lot more. I mean, I was amazed at just how much data there is. If you look at the military collaboration of the Protestants, like the English and the Dutch with the Ottomans, how they were crewing their ships, they were teaching them sailing, they were teaching them how to build better ships, make better cannons, supplying them with bullets, with cannonballs, with technology, with they were going wild because they were getting rich doing it, selling out Europe, thinking that the crocodile wouldn't eat them last. And they were crewing the ships. They were teaching this. They were the collaboration. It's like the Vichy French, World War II. They were collaborating with the Nazis. It's no different. How else does one see that? Yeah. Over it is, Christianity is already divided. Most of the division today is thanks to what the Reformation unleashed. Yes, and that is true. That's incredible, and no one knows why. And no one knows why. I'm not sure of that. Yep. So no, thank you, Century Since, and thank you, everyone. So that's it from me. I guess I can call it a night here, and I'll work on some more stuff. I got something on Darwin that I'm busy working on, and something on Calvin that I'll work on with Osama. So I should be with Osama tomorrow. And I need to finish my notes on Calvin and the Islamic alignment to show you how Islamic ideas are part and parcel of Calvin's theology. The way that he structured his Christianity is taken straight out of Sunni Islam, especially out of Hanbali fiqh. And the alignment with Ibn Taymiyyah with his ideas are just insane. It's just nuts. Yeah, war profiteers. Yeah, correct. The love of money is the source of all kinds of evil. Yes. Zeal says, thank you, Brother Lloyd. You never disappoint. So thank you. No, guys, thank you very much. I do appreciate all the support. And thank you for that. And I'm always much appreciated. It goes a long way, more than you'd realize. So yeah, guys, that's all I can share with you tonight. Do let me know in the chat. Sorry, do let me know in the comments how this has changed your view of the world, of history, and where do we go from here? Where do we go with this information? What do we do with it? How do we use it? I started on this because you read about Protestants saying things about Catholics, and I go and research it, and I can't find that it's true. And then I find a different fact, or different, I find different information. And I just continued down that road, and now we find that Protestantism was a crime. The Reformation was a crime. It was an internationally coordinated crime. What can I say? It was a collaboration with the enemy, and it undermined Europe for the sake of money, titles, and power. So Valentina already says, thank you, Lloyd. All this information is important. It's a pity that politicians don't hear and see what you and dominate. Anyway, so guys, do talk to your Catholic mods, Catholic YouTube channels. Of course, I have mentioned before, I am radioactive on those channels. They don't talk to me. Apparently I'm a bad person or whatever. Yeah, Prots do not know why their doctrine is Islamic, and it is. And I'm going to dig more into that. I'm going to start with Calvin, and we're going to dig more into that. But hopefully I've made my point. Hopefully I've shown you that this is not just some random thesis I'm basing on hearsay and rumor and wild speculation. It's based on evidence. This is history that is just sitting there. Anyone can read it. So guys, and you're welcome. And so much shocking information. Well, thank you. So guys, we'll call it a night. Do speak to your Catholic channel friends, and let's see how if they'd be willing to discuss this information, and maybe the Protestants can use a little bit of an awakening and some eye-opening information. So guys, thank you. Good night. God bless. See you next time.